Welcome to the ChurchReady podcast. Expect honest conversations for church leaders navigating AI threats to the labor-based tithe model, so you can begin the conversation your leadership team needs to have. Let's join your hosts now.
You know, usually when we talk about church leadership,
Right.
we focus so heavily on like the Sunday morning experience, you know, the sermon prep, the worship set, attendance numbers.
It's highly visible stuff.
Exactly. But if you are a pastor or a church leader listening to this right now, you already know that the real weight of leadership isn't what happens on the stage under the bright lights. It's those quiet, really heavy conversations happening in the lobby after the service.
Oh, absolutely. It's that exact moment when, the building is half empty, the music has stopped, and the real gritty life of the congregation just sort of starts to surface.
Yeah, it's noticing that a long-time faithful family is suddenly, stepping back from their volunteer roles. But then when you finally get them on the phone to check in, it isn't a spiritual crisis.
Right, or a conflict with another member or something.
Exactly. You find out the primary earner just lost their job to an automated algorithm. I mean, the artificial intelligence disruption that everyone keeps saying is coming to the corporate world, it's not just coming, it is already sitting right there in your pews. So as product evangelists for ChurchReady, we spend a lot of time really looking at the intersection of cultural shifts and church health.
Yeah, we do.
And today, we are tackling a really crucial question. What does a resilient church actually look like in the face of this economic shift? And maybe more importantly, how do you have a conversation worth having with your board about it?
Because that is really where the rubber meets the road. And we are pulling from a phenomenal stack of ChurchReady resources today for this episode.
Yes, we are.
We've got the Pastoral Report, the Economic Discussion Guide for Church Leadership, and the 6-Stage Resilience Roadmap.
Right. And our mission today is simple. We want to help you take this incredibly heavy, nuanced conversation to your leadership team. So, your elders, your deacons, your finance committee.
Yeah.
But take it to them not from a place of reactive urgency, but from a posture of informed confidence, because you cannot lead effectively if you are just ringing an alarm bell. You have to bring a blueprint.
You really do. And before you can plan strategically with the board, you have to name the reality on the ground. Like, we are looking at a massive macroeconomic shift with AI replacing jobs.
Right.
But for the local church, this is not just some tech issue to, read about in the news. This is fundamentally a pastoral issue.
Yeah, let's really ground this in reality for a second.
Yeah.
The faithful who make up the backbone of your church budget, the people who fund the youth ministry, the local missions, the facility upkeep, they're very often the ones working in knowledge-based roles. We're talking about accounting, administration, logistics management, customer service. I mean, these are the exact mid-level roles that corporations are aggressively using AI to automate and replace first.
And, the numbers only tell us about the corporate trends. They do not tell us about the human cost. When you look at the ChurchReady Pastoral Report, it breaks this crisis down into 4 deeply human dimensions.
Yeah, go ahead and walk us through those.
Well, we usually just focus on the visible financial hit, right? Like the empty bank account, the depleted savings.
The sudden spike in benevolence requests crossing the pastor's desk.
Exactly. But that financial hit doesn't happen in a vacuum. It triggers this profound visible ripple effect. So that's the first dimension, the financial hardship. But the second is mental health and identity loss.
Wow, yeah. That is huge. Because it fundamentally attacks a person's sense of self. When a career vanishes, especially in our modern culture, a person's entire identity often just goes with it. You're not just dealing with a family struggling to pay their mortgage. You are suddenly pastoring someone through a devastating identity crisis. Like, work provides structure and purpose. When a machine does what you spent 20 years mastering, the grief is immense.
It really is.
You might have a guy in your congregation who looks perfectly fine on Sunday morning, but internally, he is quietly withdrawing because the floor has just completely dropped out from under his self-worth.
Which naturally creates a pressure cooker at home. And that's the third dimension, family and relational strain. Economic pressure is, it's one of the most massive predictors of marital conflict.
Right.
As that identity loss festers, it turns into role confusion, anxiety, parents snapping at their kids. The household falls under this slow, grinding pressure that doesn't usually announce itself dramatically until it reaches an absolute breaking point.
Yeah. And to make matters worse, and this brings us to the fourth dimension, this is all happening while the person is entirely cut off from their social safety net. I mean, we are already living through a really well-documented cultural loneliness epidemic.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
For so many adults, the workplace is their primary social structure. Coworkers are their friends. When that job disappears, the water cooler conversations, the daily check-ins, the shared goals, they all just evaporate. They are suddenly profoundly isolated.
So when you look at those four dimensions together, the financial ruin, the identity loss, the family strain, and the community isolation, the sheer scale of the pastoral care required is staggering.
It is overwhelming. It is honestly like, imagine a hospital suddenly losing half of its funding on the exact same day a massive Category 5 hurricane hits the town.
Wow. Yeah, that's exactly what it's like.
Like, how in the world is a pastor supposed to handle a sharp, sudden organizational financial crisis while simultaneously managing a massive influx of human suffering? The capacity just isn't there.
What's fascinating here is that the source material actually has a name for this exact dynamic. They call it the shepherd's paradox.
The shepherd's paradox. I love that.
Yeah, and the paradox is that the very technology, artificial intelligence that is threatening your congregation's jobs and destabilizing your church's budget is the exact same tool that, if you steward it correctly in your church operations, can actually be your lifeline.
Because it solves the capacity issue.
Exactly.
If a church uses AI and technology to optimize its own administration, like to handle the repetitive, time-consuming operational tasks that eat up 40% of a staff's week, it reallocates human capital.
Right.
AI threatening jobs out in the corporate world is terrifying, obviously. But AI streamlining church operations frees pastors from administrative bloat. It gives them the hours back to actually go do the deeply human work of counseling, praying, and shepherding people through that hurricane you just mentioned.
It is a total paradigm shift. But knowing this dual threat is brewing, the financial hit and the pastoral care tsunami, the real question for the leader listening to this becomes, how do you actually talk to your leadership team about this?
Right. Because if you just walk into a Tuesday night elder meeting and say, hey guys, AI is going to destroy our budget and everyone is going to need intensive counseling.
Yeah, good luck with that. You are going to get blank stares, defensiveness, or just total panic.
And this is where the Economic Discussion Guide for Church Leadership is so brilliant. It relies on a core psychological truth. You have to use questions rather than declarations to lead a board.
Yes.
Because when you stand up and declare something terrifying, human nature immediately wants to argue with it, right? To minimize it or deny it. But when you ask a well-crafted strategic question, human nature leans in. The brain naturally tries to solve a puzzle.
Exactly. Let's look at section 1 of that guide, which is the financial reality check. There is a specific question in here that every single board needs to wrestle with this year. Question 1 asks, what happens to our budget if 30% of our top 20 donors are automated out of their careers in the next 24 months?
I mean, just pause and let that scenario sink in for a second. 30% of your top 20 donors. That isn't a minor dip in giving. That is a structural collapse of a church budget.
But the follow-up question is the real diagnostic kicker. It asks, do we even know what industries our top donors work in?
Which is such a powerful moment for a leadership team. Because what actually happens in the boardroom when you ask that, most elders, finance committee members, or executive pastors will look around the table, look at their spreadsheets, and just admit, we have no idea.
Right.
And for a board, realizing and answering, I don't know, is a highly valuable piece of data.
It really is.
It reveals a critical visibility gap. But it does so without assigning blame to anyone in the room. It naturally prompts the board to say, okay, we need better data, we need a plan, rather than, okay, we need to panic.
And by the way, the Economic Discussion Guide for Church Leadership is available in the ChurchReady Resource Hub. To gain access, download our free pastoral report, When AI Replaces Your Tither's Job. There is a link in the show notes.
Highly recommend grabbing that before your next meeting. But let's keep walking through this boardroom scenario. Let's say you ask the questions. The board looks at the data. They realize there are massive financial blind spots and pastoral care gaps looming on the horizon.
Yeah.
The natural human response to seeing those vulnerabilities is organizational anxiety. Everyone wants to tighten their belts, freeze all spending, the mood gets grim, and fear takes the wheel. Your job as the pastor is to reframe this entirely. This preparation is not an act of organizational panic. It is an act of profound theological faithfulness.
This is non-negotiable. You have to ground your strategy in Scripture, because if you don't, building resilience just looks like secular corporate risk management wearing a thin Christian veneer.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I can already hear a well-meaning finance committee member groaning at this plan.
Oh, for sure.
They'll look at these operational contingency plans, the data gathering, the strategic reserves, and say, wait a second, aren't we just relying on corporate risk management instead of trusting God to provide? Isn't building up reserves and diversifying our income actually a lack of faith? Shouldn't we just pray and trust God to take care of his church?
It is such a common pushback. And, on the surface, it sounds very spiritual, but it completely misses the biblical precedent for leadership. Let's look at the Joseph principle from Genesis 41.
Oh, this is a great example.
Right. So God gives Pharaoh a dream about 7 years of unprecedented economic plenty, followed by 7 years of severe, devastating famine. Joseph is brought in to interpret it. He doesn't just say, well, God will provide when the famine hits. Let's just keep doing what we're doing, hold some prayer meetings and trust.
No, he immediately goes to work. He engineers a solution.
Exactly. He builds massive storehouses during the 7 years of abundance. He creates a taxation system for the grain. He builds the supply chain infrastructure. He physically stores it up. That wasn't a lack of faith. Building the storehouse was faith in action.
Wow. Yeah.
He believed God's warning, so he prepared the infrastructure to actually be God's provision for the world when the crisis hit.
I love that phrasing, preparing the infrastructure to be God's provision.
And we see this standard of tangible care throughout Scripture. Look at Ezekiel 34, what the sources refer to as the shepherd standard. God rebukes the leaders of Israel, but he doesn't rebuke them for bad theology or failing to hold enough services.
Right.
He indicts them because they didn't strengthen the weak, they didn't heal the sick, and they didn't bind up the injured. Or look at Isaiah 58, the provision standard. God explicitly says true fasting is sharing your food with the hungry and providing the poor wanderer with shelter. This is about tangible, physical provision, not just offering spiritual platitudes. Preparing your institutional resilience is how a local church actually fulfills its biblical mandate at scale when an economic crisis hits its city.
So we have established the theology. The board understands the why. We are called to be the storehouse. But you cannot just hand an elder board a theology paper, right? You need an operational plan.
Right.
And this is where the sources get incredibly practical with the 6-stage resilience roadmap. And what fascinated me is that you don't start by asking the congregation for more money. You start by fixing what you already have.
Exactly. Let's dive into the mechanics of this. Stages 1 and 2 are infrastructure analysis and operational efficiency. Think of your church budget right now like a leaky bucket. Before you go to your congregation during an economic downturn and ask them to pour more water into the bucket to tithe more, you have to prove to your board that you have sealed the holes at the bottom.
Which means doing a ruthless audit of your systems. Are you paying for 4 different software subscriptions that essentially do the exact same thing? Are your administrative processes so clunky and manual that they take your staff 3 times as long as they should?
Yeah, exactly.
Closing those leaks is crucial because the money you save literally funds your future resilience strategy. You don't necessarily need a massive capital campaign. You just need to stop bleeding money out the back door.
Which naturally brings us to stage 3, operational optimization. This is where you actually deploy the technology to handle administrative tasks. And the mechanism here is critical to understand.
Right, because we aren't talking about having an AI preach the sermon. Think about how many hours your executive pastor or your office admin spends, cross-referencing volunteer schedule.
Oh, the spreadsheets alone.
Yes. Running background checks, sending out perfectly timed email reminders, doing basic data entry. If you implement automated workflows for those processes, you aren't just saving time, you are literally reallocating human capital. That is 10 or 15 hours a week that your pastoral staff gets back.
Yep.
Hours they can now spend sitting across from a weeping father who just lost his career. You automate the administration so you can radically humanize the ministry.
And that deeply human ministry leads perfectly into stages 4 and 5, which focus on outreach and community building. The source material uses the phrase belonging over programs. And we have to understand, in the context of this economic shift, that is not just a cute marketing tagline for a church bulletin.
No, it is a survival strategy for your congregation. When someone's identity is shattered by job loss and they're feeling that deep, crushing community isolation we talked about earlier, a strong, vibrant, small group network is the pastoral care. Let's be real. A solo pastor of a church of 200, or even a lead pastor of a church of 1,000, cannot personally counsel 40 different families through simultaneous job loss and marital strain. The math just doesn't work. But a healthy, well-trained small group leader can easily walk alongside two families in their living room. The community network distributes the heavy weight of care off the shoulders of the solo pastor.
The church, functioning as an organism, as a deeply connected, decentralized community, is the ultimate safety net. But to sustain that level of care, you eventually hit stage 6, which is financial diversification. This means building actual financial margin so the church isn't solely reliant on the Sunday morning passing of the plate.
And we need to ground this in church reality. When we say diversification, we aren't just throwing around corporate buzzwords. We are talking about shifting from relying 90% on tithes to getting creative. It means leveraging your empty Tuesday through Friday building space.
Right.
Could your fellowship hall become a subsidized co-working hub for the very displaced remote workers we just talked about? Could you secure local grants for your food pantry? Because when that displaced family finally comes to the church asking for help with their electric bill, or they desperately need professional Christian counseling they just can't afford, financial diversification means the church actually has the margin in the bank account to look them in the eye and say, yes, we can help.
And just a quick reminder, the ChurchReady Resilience Roadmap is available in the ChurchReady Resource Hub. To gain access, download our free pastoral report when AI replaces your tither's job. There is a link in the show notes.
So we have the roadmap. You plug the leaks, you optimize the admin, you distribute the care through community, and you diversify the income. But having the roadmap is only half the battle.
Right.
The posture the pastor brings into that boardroom is what ultimately secures the alignment to get it done.
Of our discussion today. The sources outline 3 possible futures regarding AI and the economy. First, there's the gradual shift. Things change. Algorithms take over certain sectors, but slowly enough that society mostly adapts without breaking. Second, rapid disruption sharp, sudden declines in giving, massive displacement, and huge spikes in pastoral care needs. And third, AI turns out to be mostly hype, the economy stabilizes, and your budget continues as normal.
But the thing is, we don't have a crystal ball. No pastor or elder board knows which of those 3 futures is actually going to happen over the next 5 years.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this raises the ultimate leadership question. How do you lead a board when you cannot predict the future? The core insight here is that the hardest part of visionary stewardship is not knowing exactly what to do. The roadmap already tells you what to do. The hardest part is creating the relational and strategic alignment with your leadership team to actually do it together.
Yes. Because visionary stewardship means helping your board recognize that even if the AI disruption turns out to be a complete nothing burger, building this specific infrastructure is still the right move.
100%.
Finding budget leaks, optimizing your clunky administration, deepening your small group community, and diversifying your income streams. Doing those things results in a church that is leaner, stronger, and more intimately connected.
The plan works in every single scenario. If it's a gradual shift, your church is ahead of the curve. If it's rapid disruption, you have already built the storehouse that can feed and care for your city. And if nothing happens at all, you just built an incredibly healthy, highly efficient church that has significantly more margin for local missions and ministry.
Pastors who lead boards well do not lead with reactive, crisis-driven urgency. They don't run into the room screaming, the sky is falling, we have to cut everything right now.
No, they don't.
They lead with informed confidence. They can look their elders, their deacons, and their finance team in the eye and say, we are preparing for the worst, we are praying for the best, and the deliberate steps we are taking today will profoundly bless this congregation no matter what the economy does tomorrow.
That is the very definition of leading from strength.
Yeah.
You are not passively waiting for the famine to hit before you start trying to figure out how to build a barn. You are building the barn right now while the sun is still shining.
So as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something to just kind of sit with as you prepare for your next elder meeting or leadership retreat. We've talked a lot about the threat of job loss and the need for pastoral care. But what if we flip the script? What if the resilient church of 2030 isn't just a place where people go for spiritual comfort after they lose their livelihood? What if, because you built the operational margin of the community infrastructure today, your church actually becomes the primary reskilling and professional networking hub for your entire city? What if your small groups become the new professional safety net, where believers actively help each other pivot into new careers? Imagine a church that doesn't just survive an economic shift, but actively leads its community through it.
That is the incredible opportunity sitting in front of every church leader today.
We want to thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the ChurchReady source material. We know you are carrying a heavy load as a leader, but you are not carrying it alone, and you now have the tools to prepare your people with informed confidence. Until next time, lead well, steward wisely, and trust deeply.
If you are a pastor or church leader, download the free Pastoral Report, When AI Replaces Your Tithers' Jobs, so you can begin the conversations your leadership team needs to have. There's a link in the description.